year I had an opportunity to read a book called Fight On My Soul. And because of that, Mount Olive members, as well as members from Living Water Lutheran Church, got together to have a little bit of a dialogue. But what it also did, it gave us an opportunity to get to know each other and discuss some intricacies of life in the Northern Neck that many of us had not been exposed to. And as a result of that gathering, we met Dr. James Norris. And I was intrigued so much till I paid my own money and got on a train and went to New York along with my dear newly found sister, Judy Thompson. And we engaged in a lunch with Dr. Norris. And that was one of the most memorable experiences of my life. And I'm grateful to have had that experience meeting him, because he is so full of energy as well as wisdom. And it is my honor on this evening here at Mount Olive Baptist Church on my daughter's birthday to introduce Mr. Dr. James Norris.
Williams, you made a mistake there. Introduction.
Oh, I did?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you first. Well, I got to tell you about the other mistake that the lady just came up to me, and I haven't seen her since she was 6 years old, and that was about, I think, like 60 years ago, maybe longer. And she said, "You misspelled my dad's name in your book." And I just was so embarrassed. But she's here, and I did misspell it, her father's name. And I have to tell you that you mispronounced my name, because my name is Jimmy Norris. Everybody knows me down here as Jimmy. And please, nobody in this room call me Dr. Norris. Nobody call me Mr. Norris. Call me Jimmy. Now, I want to ask you a question before we start. Number one, it's important to know, I'll be 91 May 12th. May 12th. Thank you. Now, I want to see a show of hands of the people who are over 90. Wait a minute, hold it, not too fast. Not too fast. You must have been in the first grade, you must have been the top student. Because there's one lady in here I know who's over 90, and her name is Margaret Steele Jones, and she was in school with me.
Amen.
She was the smartest one in the class. And Margaret, don't raise your hand, okay? Everybody now, raise your hand. In this room who are over 90. Isn't that remarkable? Well, I want to tell you something. How many of you remember Cracker Jacks? The little box of Cracker Jacks.
Oh, yeah, Cracker Jacks. Oh, Cracker Jacks.
And one of us box of Cracker Jacks. Mm-hmm. Get a little surprise.
Yeah, surprise.
Well, that's the way it is at 90 years of age. Every morning, you get up, look for the surprise. And I even had one this morning, but I won't go into that. But I want to thank you, Reverend Dr. Tyrone Williams and Reverend Dr. Judy Thompson, for giving me the privilege to come in and speak to this austere group. I am just honored, beyond expression, to be here. Thank you for taking the time to come out and join me in a conversation this evening. And I want you to do me a favor. I want you to kind of just close your eyes a little bit and step away, not step away, but you're all sitting. Just move down to the Rappahannock River. Let's look over the Rappahannock River. And let's imagine you're sitting, watching the boats go by, and the sun getting ready to set. And beautiful clouds over the river. And we're going to have a little conversation. That's what we're going to have. It's going to be a conversation between you and me, each one of us. And that's what this talk is going to be about. But it's a wonderful experience to come to Mount Olive because I have connections to this church through one of your former deacons, Daniel Jones, and I'm in touch with his daughter now almost weekly, Mary Day Jones, who writes the Bogey Neck newsletter. And I look forward to reading that. And then also there's D. Norris, who's a member of your church, and I'm in touch with D. Norris periodically. And it's such a beautiful church. And Mary Day, her name is Mary Jones Day, her brother was named Bill Jones. He was an architect. And he did some marvelous sketches of this church. How many have you seen the sketches that he's built in? Beautiful sketches. And I have a sketch. And I told, I'll call her Mary, the other day that I have a sketch of the church, and she sent me some more sketches. And I'm going to use them as postal cards. I'd like to send that postal card. But it's a beautiful sketch of the church. I'm going to encourage her to send you some copies.
Okay, thank you.
I'm talking a little bit about going from 90 to 90 rather, and looking back over the years and looking forward. The theme of the talk is the ultimate test of a moral society is the kind of world it leaves to its children. The ultimate test of a moral society is the kind of world that it leaves to its children. And I just want you to take that message with you today. That's the only thing I ask. That's all I request. I'm not here to push any type of agenda, but I just want you to think about that. You know, I was born here in Kilmarnock. I grew up in Kilmarnock. And I can tell you, I love this place. I had a wonderful childhood here. And it was really fun growing up. Although my dad was pretty strict, my dad believed kids should work. And I started working at age 6. And what we'd have to do was scrape the beetles off of the tomato plants because my dad did not believe in insecticides. And we'd, every few days, have to go out and scrape those beetles off the potato plants. And my dad grew enough potatoes to feed a family of 8 children from June to June. And we had pigs and cows and chickens. And when I got to be 12, I had to learn to milk cows. And I milked cows until I was left to go to college. But I had a lot of fun. And I had a lot of fun with kids I grew up with. And Marvis was in school with me. And she knows Marvis and I were in mathematics geometry class together, as a matter of fact. And Marvis remembers our teacher, Miss Smart, a wonderful lady. And I was a little bit mischievous. And I don't know what I did. Marvis, I don't know whether you remember what I did, but I did something, and the teacher got angry with me. And I didn't know what to do. But she just kind of pushed me aside. She just kind of ignored me. And I went home, told my mother, Miss Marks is very angry with me. And she said, what does Miss Marks like? She said, what does she need for her class? And I said, she's always drawing circles behind me. They're lopsided. And she says, well, I'm going to get a compass from Tollhammer, and I go to Richmond, and you apologize and give her that compass. And I brought that compass in to Miss Marks, and I presented her that compass. And I apologize I behaved from that day on, and Miss Marks and I became fast friends. That was kind of childhood, and we had respect for the teachers had respect for us, and it was just a wonderful growing up here, and I have such fond memories. I can't tell you how wonderful it is to be back in this community. But I tell you, I left here, I went to college, I went to medical school, I trained as, I came back to practice with Dad after I finished medical school for a while, but unfortunately we didn't have a difficult separation, but it wasn't as pleasant as I would like. But my dad respected my wishes to be on my own. And I moved to Florida, and he came to Florida to visit me, and he told me when he saw the kind of practice I had in Florida that I probably made the right decision. And we reconciled, and we got along well until his death. But then in Florida, I had a couple of unfortunate incidents. I had a very good practice in Florida, but I had 4 young boys in an automobile. They were all teenagers, and in the middle of the night, they were speeding, and they failed to make the curve. And when they failed to make the curve, of course, there are usually trees around those curves, and they hit a tree. All 4 of them went out through the windshield, and they all piled on top of each other, and all 3 were killed right. One boy survived, but he had severe abdominal pain. So they brought him to the hospital, and they called me, and I said, we've got to operate on him probably. He's got something going on in his abdomen. And I called the surgeon rather, and the surgeon was out on the golf course. And he said, give him IV fluids and morphine, and I'll come in. And I wasn't happy with that, so another surgeon happened to come in, and I said, Dr. Sewell, I have this young boy who was in this accident, and he is in pretty bad shape. Sewell came in and looked at him and said, look, we've got to get him to the operating room. But unfortunately, he died. And that hit me really hard. And then I had another episode in Florida where I had this child who was, actually she was a little young, just almost 16, 17-year-old girl who was in labor. And the fetus was in distress, and I knew it was in distress. I called the obstetrician and said, I've got a patient here with the fetus in distress. Can we come in? I think you need to do a C-section. And she said, check your heartbeat and call me back in an hour. I did that. I said, I think we got to do something. She said, well, call me back in an hour. So finally, by daybreak, I was pretty exhausted. The patient was pretty exhausted too. And this doctor came in and I asked him, could he take a look at the patient? He said, oh yeah, we can deliver that child with forceps. And he did deliver the child with forceps. The child came out as blue as the sky. And I think that that child ended up with brain damage. So I said, I'm going to study surgery and come back here. Then I can do my own operation so I can have a patient who's in distress. So I went away to Cleveland. I finished medical school in Cleveland. I went away to New York to study surgery, and I was at Queens General Hospital in New York for 4 years. And in 1966, I don't know how many of you have heard of Dr. Hubbard. Dr. Hubbard used to be a general practitioner in Lancaster County. But his son was head of the draft board. I was 34 years old, and he called me and he said, Jimmy, things are heating up in Vietnam, and I got to draft you. And he says, I would suggest you volunteer for the branch of service you want, otherwise I'm going to have to put you in the Army. Well, the reason I didn't get drafted until 34 is because I got a deferment for the Korean War because I was a pre-medical student. So I got drafted at age 34, and I served for 2 years in the U.S. Navy, spent 4.5 months, even though I requested on my dream sheet. I don't know how many of you know what a dream sheet is in the military, but a dream sheet is in the military. You put on your desired assignments where you would like to go, and 1, 2, 3, and you list the destinations. The reason they call it a dream sheet is because it's a dream. That's all it is. I'd met a girl in the Far East when I was a resident, and I apologize for laughing, but I really had an ulterior motive for wanting to go to the Far East because I wanted to be near this girl, near her country. She lived in Japan. And so I put 1, 2, 3, Far East, Far East, Far East. I got sent back to New York. Well, anyhow, I ended up connecting with her, and we got married, and we have a child, a son now. He's 54 years old, and they live in, and I have 4 grandchildren. But I want to tell you that experience in the Navy was the 2 years that I spent in the Navy were 2 of the best years of my life. I kid you not. And the experiences I had, and the men that I met. I also learned a little bit about our government's involvement because I was pretty knowledgeable about Vietnam when I got there. And I had read some very well-written books by a fellow named Bernard Fall. He was a historian, a journalist, and an author. And he had written a book on Dien Bien Phu, the fall of Dien Bien Phu. That's where the French were defeated in Vietnam. And it was called, excuse me for using the word in the church, A Hell in a Very Small Place. A deeply moving book. If you've never read it, you'll find it interesting. And he also wrote about a little corridor in Vietnam called the Street Without Joy. And he was killed on the Street Without Joy when he stepped on a bomb. But most important thing that he did was he wrote a very important 2-volume text on the history of Vietnam. And I read all those books. And unfortunately, that adventure in Vietnam, I don't know whether, I have a friend here who's military named Lloyd Hill. He's sitting over there. I don't know whether he'll agree with me or not. But I think that was a real misadventure on our part. And I'm not going to get in a discussion of foreign policy today, but I think it was a great tragic misadventure. Our service in Vietnam, the U.S. Army and Navy in Vietnam. So then after Vietnam, I came back and I decided not to go back to Florida. I was appointed chief of surgery at the VA hospital in Tuskegee, Alabama. Had a great experience in Alabama. I was there for almost 4 years, and I was in charge of surgery. And I saw so many veterans from World War II and so many veterans from the Korean War that needed reconstructive surgery. I decided to go to the University of Michigan and study plastic and reconstructive surgery, and with the intention of coming back to Alabama. But my wife had different ideas, and she said she wasn't going back to Alabama, so I ended up in New York, and that's where I've been for 49 years, and it's been a great experience. I've seen many changes in my 90 years. I think probably one of the greatest changes was the civil rights movement, and many positive changes have come out of that. I think that not only did blacks benefit from that, I think other minority groups benefited as well. And one of the finest tributes to John Lewis when he died was written up in the paper. A Korean young man came to his service to pay his respects for the sacrifices that Lewis has made, because it made it possible for him to come to this country. I thought that was magnanimous. The civil rights period has moved into the present period where we are now. And we're also in what's known as the Industrial Revolution. And it is the fourth Industrial Revolution. The first Industrial Revolution was back when we went from ox carts and horses to mechanized vehicles, mechanized transportation. Then the second revolution came with the radio and introduction of the telecommunications. The third revolution came with the introduction of the internet and technology, and now we're in the fourth revolution with 3D printing, artificial intelligence, technological changes that are just beyond belief. And we have to think about what kind of world do we want to leave to our children. And I tell you the way I've been thinking about it. When I was in medicine, we were taught in medical school that a patient comes in, you make a diagnosis, and you start some therapy. You start treatment, whatever. The patient has diabetes, you start them on diabetic medication, monitor the blood pressure and so forth. There was a doctor named Lawrence Weed from Maine, and he said, that should be a different approach. When a patient comes in, if he's a diabetic, of course you make the diagnosis of diabetes. Of course you treat him for the diabetes. But what other problems does he have? If he has cataracts, that's a problem. If he has ingrown toenails, that's a problem. If he has heart condition, that's a problem. And so he lists all the problems. And he then systematically would go through each problem and address it and systematically treat it. And I adopted that approach in my medical career and also in my private life and the way I view things, the way I view the future, the problems. And I've been thinking about, as we think of what kind of world would we like to leave to our children, think of the problems that we are facing. And I think that one of the big problems we are facing is climate change. It's real, it's here. Another problem we are facing is debt. And when I say debt, I'm talking about $30 trillion of national debt. And the interest on $30 trillion of national debt is $1.2 trillion a year at 4% interest. So just think of that. But think of the students who are in debt. And right now, Uncle Joe, I call him Uncle Joe, is tussling now with the Supreme Court about whether they're going to forgive some of that debt. And I'm not going to get into that today. The only thing I'm going to say is that try to avoid debt as much as possible. Personal debt, credit card debt. Debt is going to sink this country, I kid you not. Then wellness is another problem we have to face. Think of the food chain. You know, I'm really concerned. Honestly, I would like to, before I leave this earth, engage some young people to do some research on the real effects of hormones in the food chain. You know they give cows hormones so they get more milk. You know they give chickens antibiotics so that they get less infections and they can grow chickens faster, quicker, and get them to the market. The FDA has approved pellets to put in the ears of animals. They are hormone pellets, so the animal will grow faster. Now, you're going to tell me that some of that's not seeping into the food that we eat? Think about it. Do I want to leave that for my children? And then we have to think about another problem, and it's the problem of aging. We didn't have people living as long as we live nowadays when I was a young child. When I was even in my 30s and 40s in medical school. And then the family units were different. And most of the family, part of the family usually lived in the vicinity of the person, the older person. But now families are scattered all over the world. And we've got to think of the age and how we're going to approach that. And I just got through, I didn't get through really. Actually, I had to give up. After 8 years of taking care of an invalid sister, I had to turn it over to my nephew because it was just too much for me. The time that it takes to take care of someone who's disabled takes a tremendous amount of time and energy and expense. And we have to think about aging. And we have to be realistic about aging. And I would say to all of you in this room today, if you, I promise I wasn't going to give you an advice, but I have to give you this. If you don't have a will, make a will. And please don't say well, I have a will, but it's not updated, because if you have a will and it's not updated, you don't have a will. And the other thing is, make a life directive, end of life directive. That's so important. It's so important. I'm dealing now with a close friend whose father has dementia. And the doctors want to put a tube in him. He's 92 years old. He has dementia. And they want to put a tube in him because he can't swallow. He has a problem swallowing. Think of putting a tube in this man. He's 92 years old. He could go on for a number of years. And I think that's cruel. I think that's unfair. But maybe he avoided that. We don't know. She doesn't know because she never discussed it with him. Take time and discuss with your children or whoever is going to be your primary caregiver as you age, what you would like to have done. I've already done it. It's all written up what I want done, and I'll tell you right here what I want, and I don't want anything done. And I had COVID 3 weeks ago, and I was not feeling very well, and I was concerned whether or not I didn't even bring up going to the hospital with my wife. I made up my mind if I needed oxygen, I was going. I'd already found out where I could contract for home oxygen. And if that didn't work, then that was going to be it. But they weren't going to take me to the hospital and put a tube in me, that's for sure. So those are hard decisions, but they have to be made. Our educational system is in disarray. I don't care how you slice it. Our educational system is in disarray. Doesn't have respect for the teachers. The teachers, a lot of teachers don't respect the children. And I can't get into too much of the difficulty there, but I do want to say to you that we have to get back to having respect for the teachers, have to have a more orderly public school system. I'm a product of the public school system. My friend Lloyd Hill is a product of the school system. My niece is a product of the public school system. I don't know how many of you who are products of the public school system, but the public school system is a pretty good system. But you can't have a public school system and then have charter schools and then have money going from the federal treasury to religious schools and academies and so forth, because what you're going to end up with is a dual school system. And you're looking at a product of a dual school system. And I can tell you from personal experience, it does not work. Law enforcement. I want to tell you about some experiences with law enforcement. I had my first experience at age 14 with law enforcement. we used to get a driver's license at age 14 in 1946. And I came to Tijuana one day, and I was on my way to my dad's little V8 Ford, and I was by myself, and I wasn't paying attention to the speed. The next thing I noticed, there was a red light flashing, and this big policeman, a fellow named Clifford Jett, the former lumberjack. How many remember Mr. Jett? He got out, and Mr. Leggett hardly, I thought he was maybe mute because he didn't talk. He just got out, license. I showed him the license. I was writing the ticket. Well, I'll tell you what I decided to do. I said, I got a ticket, that was pretty bad. Well, my dad had a service station, and he had a fellow working at a service station named Jack Taylor. So I always, even at age 14, I always had a little savings because I worked hard and saved some money and so forth. So I said, Jack, I want you to take me to court Monday. I got a ticket for speeding. So Jack said, okay, I'll take you up there. And so Monday morning, I bounced down the stairs with my bookcase and said to my mom and dad, okay, I'm going to school, see you later. My dad said, son, I'll take you up. Well, I'll tell you, I was reflective. But my dad took me to court. The judge was really not very kind to my dad. I'll never forget it. I was really annoyed the way he spoke to my dad. And he asked me, was I guilty or not guilty? My dad said guilty, son. And I said, guilty. And $40. And that's what it cost me. That was the last ticket my dad paid for it. But I have had, over the years, like 14 or 15 encounters with policemen, usually for exceeding the speed limit. And I'll tell you, they all ended amicably. Sometimes with a ticket to pay a fine, but most of the time, just be careful and stay under the speed limit. Because we were brought up to respect authority. And I would speak very politely to policemen. I would also apologize for speeding. And I would probably give them some explanation for why I was over the speed limit. But nevertheless, never in any type of confrontation. And that worked out well for me. I think that we need to really think about the interaction of our population with the law enforcement agencies. And I know that, Tyrone, you've gone a long way toward addressing that here, and I commend you for that. But I think that we need to not only train our young people how to respond when they are stopped by an officer. We also need to train the policemen how to respond to de-escalate potentially explosive situations. And I don't know where these people who talk about defunding the policemen come from, but I can tell you that it doesn't make sense. To me, it doesn't make sense. I'm all for not only funding the policemen, but paying them more and paying them better, because they do a hard job and they deserve to be compensated for their time and for their risk. The next problem, I don't want to leave my grandchildren, I don't want to leave them with this, any thoughts of any kind of hate. No anti-Semitism, and I'm so sorry to see that on the rise in this country, because I can tell you from a personal experience that no group of people, no representatives rather of a group of people have helped me more in my career than Jewish doctors. And I've had Jewish patients as well, and I cannot fathom the animosity that some of the people have toward the Jewish people. And there's no place in our society for anti-Semitism. there's no place in our society for anti-Islam. There's no place in our society for the anti-gender movement that's being pushed by some politicians. And I'd like for you to think about that, because I don't want to leave a world where my children have to live with this kind of thing daily. And gun violence, that's another problem. About 150 Americans die every day from gun violence. It's a real crisis in this country. We've got to do something about it. And there are places that are doing something about it. And if you're interested, University of Michigan has a very fine program that I can give you the information that if you're interested after the talk. I just want to say very briefly, what are some of the things that we might do to help leave a better world for our children? Every one of us has to get every one of us in this room has to get involved in helping our fellow citizens to vote and vote intelligently. And that's so important. And that vote is so important to us. We've got to put people in office who have a vision for this country. My dad used to say, where there is no vision, the people perish. And nothing could be truer. We have to have a better group of people as politicians in various offices in this country. Another thing I might suggest is the businessmen, if you have a business, see if you can engage a young person during the summer months when they have time to offer to work in your business, offer an apprenticeship. I did that, I started doing that when I was even in practice in Florida. I had a little high school student working for me. And I'll never forget, she was a wonderful little girl. Her name was Clara. And one day I asked Clara for an instrument, and she brought just the opposite of what I'd asked her. And I was a little bit upset because it was kind of a tense situation where I needed this particular instrument right away. So when things quieted down, I said to my other secretary, Jean, I said, Jean, is Clara so stupid she doesn't know the difference between the two instruments? And she said, Dr. Norris, Clara doesn't hear well. And I didn't know that Clara had a hearing problem. So I talked to Clara, and I got her in touch with an audiologist. We got her fitted with a hearing aid, and I cannot tell you, she did phenomenally well in life. But the other important thing about having young people to work is you give them some sense of self-esteem. Plus, they get money. And I would, the candy stripers who work in the hospital, I understand they don't get paid, but I think any youngster who's given an opportunity to be an apprentice or work in a situation ought to get a stipend. It'll help the self-esteem, and it'll also help them know how to manage money. We've got to help our young people to become more financially literate. That's very important. And we've got to have more respect for our elders. And I'm working now on a couple of cemetery projects here in Lancaster County. I'm working on a memorial garden for the Calvary Baptist Church Cemetery, and I'm working on resurrecting the old St. John's Cemetery. And the old St. John's Cemetery goes back to the 19th century, but it's all just patch of weeds there, except for 2 or 3 families who keep up the graves. But it's a large place. I think it's almost 3 acres. And so I'm working on that. And I would urge that we think about a day of remembrance where all the family goes out to the cemetery and cleans off the cemeteries, and cleans off the grave sites rather. And maybe do that twice a year. I got this idea primarily from my experience being married to a Japanese lady, because every time we go to Tokyo, we have to go to the cemetery, we have to clean up the gravesite. My son had to go from early age, 6 or 7 years old, and now, even though he's 50, whenever he goes to Tokyo, he does the same. They will develop an appreciation for the ancestors. It's so important. And I would urge that we make that part of our culture here in the United States. And the other thing I'd like to do is to bring back the drag. I think we really need to bring back the drag. Our young men and women should have to spend a year or 2 in national service. And that way they will better appreciate responsibilities, obligations they have to our country. It will also help them to transition from teenage to adulthood. And I think it will also give the parents some thought of us having skin in the game, and so we can help influence some of the foreign policy decisions that are made in Washington that are, in my estimation, not in the best interest of this country. I'm deeply distressed by the war in Ukraine. And I'm not only distressed because I have skin in the game, because my grandson just finished officers training school in the Finnish Navy, and Finland has an 800-mile border with Russia. And he just, every Finnish high school graduate has to go, male graduate that is, has to go in the military for 1 year. And they've been on military alert since the Winter War of 1939. The other thing is, I think that by being in the military, the family will really understand the importance of that child having going off to the service. And they'll think twice about it. Maybe, should I vote for this? Or what is this politician saying about the war in Ukraine? What is the politician saying about our Middle East policy? And certainly, what is the politician saying about China? Do we want a war with China? I want to ask you that. Do we want a war with China? No. China is not going to win. I can assure you. I can also assure you the United States is not going to win. But I can assure you who's going to lose. And that's civilization. And I'd like to end this talk and let's have some questions and answers and the discussion. I was on a cruise ship and I was sitting on the balcony and the sun was setting in the Atlantic Ocean, on the horizon. And after a while, it became dark. Pitch dark. And I couldn't see any lights anywhere I looked. And I thought, my gosh, suppose the ship did something and we went down. There were 7,000 people on that ship. There were 4,500 passengers, 2,500 crew. If that ship had hit something, we would have all gone down. We would all go down together. No matter what race, what background, what sex, but we would all go. We all on this ship. I want you to think about that. And if we don't come together and pull together and work together, this mighty ship known as the United States will go down. On that, I'd like to ask you if you have any questions or comments.
Yeah, thank you, Jimmy, for sharing your thoughts with us today. Is that better?
Okay.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, question. Jimmy.
So,
Jimmy,
Yes, that's
How are
right,
you?
Lacey. How are you tonight?
our church, and I guess along with other churches, seem to not be able to, I'm not going to say entice, but make it favorable for the youth to attend the church. Can't get them here. Do you have any remedy for that? Do you think that the church is an important part of a child's life, or is it not?
Well, you've asked me first, I'll answer your last question. I'll answer your last question first, because I think it's important. The church absolutely was an important part of my life growing up. When I was growing up in Gilmar, we had to go to church every Sunday. And then there was a Reverend Thomas Davis who became minister when I was about 12, 13 years old. He started a junior deacon group, and I was a junior deacon in the church, I think, until I went off to high school. We were very much involved in the church, and I think that one of the instrumental factors in my development, I think the church is an important, probably the most important institution in the community. And I'm distressed as you about the youth involvement in the church and also the fall off in the membership. And I think that two things maybe could be done. Do what we can to encourage the parents to come to church, and then get the parents to church, ask them to bring the children, but have some programs for the children. I think one of the great things I had in life when I was growing up was hobby. First I had a hobby building model airplanes. That's just absolutely phenomenal. And even now, at 90 years old, I'll build a model airplane occasionally. And the other thing is I have photography. Now, I noticed that they just developed a camera club at Lancaster High School, but the churches could have camera clubs for the youth, maybe enlist several youth to develop a camera club. That would be another thing that might be done. Reverend Chamberlain, who was the minister of the New St. John's Church, used to have a debating clubs in his church. And a number of other churches had debating clubs. And I think that's another way to get children involved. I think we're going to have to look at what the children are interested in and see if we can go in the direction of what they're interested in and have projects and programs that might attract them. That might be part of the solution, I'm not sure.
Thank you, sir.
Anyone else? Question?
Jimmy, I just want to thank you publicly for your pioneering work in plastic surgery. In 2010, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and so I'm the one who did the research, what's the state of the art in terms of DCIS, ductal carcinoma in situ, what's the state of the art. I was very concerned about the scarring that I might get from the surgery, so I got on the internet, of course, and found that this wonderful article with 3 authors that was about hypertrophic scarring and hyperpigmentation in either African American women, women of color, with breast surgery. And of course, there were 3 authors. I saw the abstract. I couldn't access it online. I went to MCB, and imagine my utter just delight to find that somebody I knew was one of the authors. And I say I knew, I knew Alice, I knew Alma, I knew Thornton, I knew Martha Ann, his siblings. I knew who he was, but I hadn't met him. And so I got on the phone and called Jimmy Norris. And his article was state of the art. I mean, it was the last thing, about 20 years old, but that was the state of the art. And so it counted me. And so I just want to thank you publicly for that work.
Yes, sir. Hey, Mark. You need the microphone?
I'll try to do it without, thank you. I hesitate to call you Jimmy because I hold you and your father in such enormous respect. Your father, and my name is Ammon Dutton, and our fathers knew each other, and my father was often talking about your father to me. And he had great respect for him, and I know when I got the measles at 6 years old, your father was the one my father called to come and help. And But I want to thank you for writing that wonderful book about your father. It was an inspiring book of what one man could do in a community. And he led the community. And not just the African Americans. He was a beacon of leadership to everyone and what he could do in a community in a tough time. There's another person who my father used to talk about and who I think should be remembered too, and I wonder if you knew anything about him. His name was A.T. Wright. And I would ask you to tell me if what things that I have gathered about Mr. Wright are true. I heard that he had the only accredited school in Lancaster County because he could hire master's degrees and there were people available. I know in my school, at Whitestone School, we were unaccredited. We didn't even have bathrooms when I was a child then. And I don't think A.T. Wright School had any bathrooms either, but they had teachers, which is a more important thing. And I wonder if you would comment on Mr. Wright, because I'm trying to get an article written and published on another great African American that we can all be proud of.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Mr. Johnson. I want to first ask you a question. Did you ever hear of a fellow named Charles Harney? Charles Harney was a medical book salesman who moved down to Murray Point, and back around 1995 or so, and had a home there. But he went around doing videotapes of different personalities. Do you remember him?
I've heard about him,
Okay.
yes, and I think there's someone here who knows all about him. We at the Historical Society that I'm a supporter of,
The Lancaster?
Lancaster County Historical Society, they were sponsoring the wonderful tapes on African Americans as well as white people on older days, and that's when I heard about him a little bit.
Well, yeah, I think there's a tape of Mr. Duncan that I had that Mr. Harney loaned me, and he interviewed your dad, and your dad commented about the behavior of the students. Your dad was Commonwealth attorney, right?
He was appointed Commonwealth attorney because the prior Commonwealth attorney was getting drunk in court. And so he never had to run for the office, but he was the Commonwealth attorney for several years.
Well, if anybody knew who were the misbehavior, what children misbehaved in schools in Lancaster County, it was the Commonwealth attorney for sure. And your father on that tape says that the best behaved students were in A.T. Wright High School, and that Mr. Wright ran that high school. Ran a tight ship. I think that's the way he had it. It was a marvelous interview, and I think I just sent that tape to Ms. Hart. But yes, A.T. Wright was a remarkable person. And Lloyd, would you like to comment about Mr. Wright?
Yes, I'm Lloyd Hill.
Come on up, Lloyd.
Several times Jimmy has mentioned my name, and for those of you who read his book, Fight On My Soul, I'm that 4.5-year-old black kid that had polio that his father treated and saved my life. So I hope I met Jimmy in 1948. He was getting ready to graduate. I was just starting school. At A.T. Wright, his classes went from the first grade through the 12th grade, all in one building. a classroom that would have one teacher would teach 3 grades, like first, second, third. Then you have another teacher who would teach the 4th, 5th, and 6th. We had a library that doubled as a classroom. We had a science lab that doubled as a classroom. We had outdoor toilets. We had to go in at recess to bring wood in to stoke the fires. The floors were swabbed with kerosene oil or coal lime and dust. Can you imagine a wooden building with kerosene oil on the floor and a stove, pot belly in the middle? But anyway, that's what it was. A.T. White had some wonderful students because at that time they had no other choice. That was the school of choice that you had to go to. And we had teachers that were in the community. So you saw them at the grocery store. You saw them at the church. You saw them everywhere. They knew your mother. You knew them. So they cared about you and always want you to do the best that you could because they felt that you were representatives of your whole community. Can you imagine a kid have a whole community on his back that you have to live up to? Say, boy, you can't let these people down. So that's how we grew up. So Mr. Wright was a great, great person. So Jimmy, I want to say something else to Wanda. You mentioned a lot of things that need to be worked on and all the great things, but as we look at this community here, we will see that a lot of folks who need to be here are not here. We're preaching to the choir. You got the kids aren't afraid of anything. When we go through our school system, we might have the superintendent who's afraid of the parents. The superintendent might be afraid of the school board. The school board might be afraid of the principal afraid of the teachers. And the kids aren't afraid of anybody. So we have to get the kids in the church, then we have to get them in school, we have to teach parenting so that mothers and dads realize they can't be buddy-buddy to their kids. They got to be parents first, and then they can be your buddy-buddy later on. The elephant in the room, Jimmy, is can we all just get along? You know, you mentioned a lot of things that need to be worked on, but if we don't get along as a society, someone once said we either hang together or we will hang separately. And we're all in this boat together, and this boat is leaking. We're trying to rewrite history. We're trying to rewrite history. And most of us know that if you don't believe in history, you're doomed to repeat the same failures over and over again. Can you imagine? And this is a wonderful group. I applaud all the things that you're doing. I was with you, but the COVID kind of knocked me back because I got scared. I'm old. I'm black. I have 3 conditions, so I didn't want to go out there. I am 18 years old with 65 years of experience. so I kind of backed away. But I believe that this way of living is our new normal. So we just have to come out and do whatever we have to do. So Jim, I'm pleased to see that you had the COVID. It was a death sentence. You got over it, even though a lot of people do die from it. But we have to go on and live our lives. I wear a mask because I believe the COVID cured all the flus I used to have. I think it cured all the colds I used to have the last 3 years. I haven't had the flu. I haven't had the cold. The only thing I've done different, I wore a mask. So I say the mask cured the flu and cured that for me. But we have to get along, and we cannot rewrite history. We need to look at history for what it is, learn from it, and move on. And those of you who are here, we're preaching to the choir. I've seen you before. You've probably seen me around before, writing something crazy in the paper. But at any rate, we need to get along because this world is, my wife said, Lord, this is a terrible world out there. It is terrible. And we kind of will fall for anything. Can you imagine, and I'm going to let you go, can you imagine those of you who saw the January 6th riot, insurrection on our Capitol, over 50% of one party believe it never happened. Believe that everything was peaches and cream. They're just like a Sunday stroll to the park. Now, how are we going to get along if you got that many people believing that that didn't happen? They think the policemen killed themselves. They think that the 140 some people injured themselves. They think the defecation in the Capitol, the urine on the Capitol, broken windows. So those people get that? No. So until we can look at what the problems are and realize that we have to get along. We have to. This is the only earth that we have. We got to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lloyd. And Mr. Dutton, after the meeting, I'd like to talk to you. Maybe I can find some more information on Mr. Wright that I can give you from my personal reflections on Mr. Wright. He died the year before I went to A.P. Wright. And a fellow named Mr. C.N. Bennett was the principal for my 4 years there. So I didn't have Mr. Wright at all when I was at A.P. Wright. Maybe I'll find some people, though, who may be able to help us. Thank you.
Thank you. First, I'd like to applaud the comments from the previous speaker. A lot of truth there. I read an article where a young boy had a dream of, his dream was to get out of Lancaster County. I'm going, you gotta be kidding me. You know, we have people here that have never been out of Lancaster County. And my thought is, you know, your comment about the draft, that gets people out of Lancaster County. And in the military, I'm ex-military, it taught me discipline. It taught me, you know, I learned to trade. And those things are available if people would take advantage of it. You know, these counselors at the high schools, you think they're saying, hey guys, you know, if you don't know what you're going to do, go in the military and get a trade. But they're not doing that. They're just like, they graduate them and let them go out there and find for themselves. And I think that's wrong.
I agree with you 100%. I think the whole business of the draft has gotten very political. And Charlie Rangel, who is from New York City, he was pushing for resuming the draft, but it got too hot for him in Washington and he backed off, which was a big mistake. Go ahead, go on that question.
You have a question?
Don't need to interrupt you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me? My name is Vicki Gasparini. I'm somewhat of a newbie to the Northern Neck, or a come here, if you would say. This is my husband, Frank Gasparini. We're carrying our torches down this way. Everything in life we have learned and we believe in. We live in Eastville. This is my second stint, I will say, on the Northern Neck. Actually, my first stint was insignificant from the standpoint that my first veterinarian in Leesburg, Virginia, that's where both of us met and came from, was a Dr. Cockrell. And I fell in love with that guy. And I was told that he was the first African-American veterinarian, and this is what I was told, in the state of Virginia. And he hailed from somewhere, I want to say, up in the area that I live today. And I don't know those of you who've been here a long time if you know that name. At any rate, that was probably unknown to me until I had a context for it, and you today have given me a lot of that context. The second time was in a second marriage. I came down here to build the big dream, the big house on the river, and that collapsed. But it collapsed in a good way because it set me off on a personal journey. I was a teacher. I had 27 years for the state of Virginia at that time, and I'm an English teacher, the master's in special ed. And you ruffled my feathers a little bit in the teaching department, but that's good. I have a couple of things to say on that. So the long and short of it, I'm a pretty tough lady. I got on my feet, and I was blessed to have a year at Washington Lee High School as a senior English teacher, teaching regular and honors English. And that was a much greater experience for me than likely the children, although it was pretty mutual. And I loved them. And I saw some of the problems, which are not exclusive anywhere else in the country in terms of education. that we're coming together here. That's a very good start. The other thing is, I taught seniors primary. I love them. Some people would say, you're out of your mind. But the first unit we did, concurrent with them going to college in June, was they had to write a college essay. And if you think that the kids today aren't as good or whatever, I'm going to tell you they are. And my dad used to tell me this, and he was a veteran of World War II and Korea, that every generation is greater than the one before. These kids today are the greatest educated, and with technology, the most exposed and connected. Our hope is with them, and I've always believed, or I wouldn't have done it for 40 years, that it lays with these children. And you're right, it's not always about money, because Washington Lee High School had some of the best daggone teachers there, and they were sisters and brothers of this area. They went off, got educated, came back, and dedicated themselves. And the reason I had to go, my life was in peril. Financially, I had to return to Loudoun County, where the big bucks were, in order to maximize my retirement salary. That was important to me. At that time, as a single woman and a teacher, down here with a master's and 27 years, I got $55,000 a year. Now, the only reason I could stay here and give the fruits of my talent and labor, which I loved and I have, I'm a pretty damn good teacher, okay, is because I had a retirement from Fairfax County. They were smart back in the 70s, and they allowed teachers to have a separate retirement from the state of Virginia. So I was able to collect that retirement, plus my salary, okay, from Washington Lee, and that kept me here. Unfortunately, I had to go back to maximize my salary. I walked into the Loudoun County schools, this was about 2011, and I had to interview again. I hadn't done that in a long time, because I was with Fairfax County forever. And they were palatial. Washington Lee still had blackboards, hardwood floors, and, you know, the gym was okay, a little embarrassing for those kids to bring outside, you know, schools in. And I went up there, when I walked into one of the Loudoun County schools that I taught in for the last 3 years of my career, I cried. I cried because it's an injustice that taxpayer money, predominantly property tax, pays for kids' educations. And that down here, we don't have that base, okay? But they have it in Loudoun, and they should. I'm not going to knock them in Northern Virginia. I don't care what you say, okay? They're paying for their schools, and they got a big school base. But I also will tell you, and then I'll get off, because the hook's coming, I know. And I did a graduation speech once for one of the schools up there, and the whole thing was, God loves the little children, all the children of the world, red, yellow, black, and white, we are precious in His sight. And I believe that to my heart. The kids know that when you walk in a classroom, if you love them or not. And I used to tell them, I love you. Oh, right. Yeah. And you have to earn my respect, but I have to earn yours. And every teacher should know that. The first thing they had to learn was the Pledge of Allegiance. I said, why are you standing up there and not pledging? They're all like, yeah. And I said, let's look at the history of the pledge and what the flag is. And then they wrote their essays, and you get to know them. And then we did a unit called The History of Public School Education. It's out in video form. I think it's 4 tapes by wonderful people, narrated by Meryl Streep, if you could ever get a hold of that one. And they have to watch it. We've come a long way, baby. If you look at Lyndon Johnson signing Civil Rights Amendment with his public school, elementary school teacher from down in Texas, and you see this affirmative rights, you see civil rights, you see the Americans with Disabilities rights, you see all these things, and vouchers, okay, you know what I mean? The worst thing they did with civil rights is they integrated and fired all the African American teachers. Okay, I'm done. This is the last set, I promise. I'm 70 and I forgot what it was, but here you go.
I'd just like to ask her one question, though. Tyrone?
I am a member of the Interracial Conversations Board, and I would ask that in response to what you have presented us with this evening, you ask yourself, what am I doing to help this county achieve that goal? What organization do I attend where we can collect all of our votes, all of our activities, all of our efforts, and make a difference? You're here this evening. Where will you go when the Democratic Committee meets? Where will you go when the NAACP meets? Where will you go when Interracial Conversation has its next meeting? Ask yourself, what am I doing? Thank you.
I just want to ask, you said I ruffled some feathers. I'd just like to ask you what you meant by that.
What I meant by that is, you said that everybody should, they should reinstate the draft in terms of being invested and having pride in our system as people and Americans.
Yes.
I think, like some of the countries, Germany, it doesn't necessarily have to be just military service, but I agree that every kid should have to have 2 years, and they're young adults, they're not kids anymore, where they have to serve in some capacity in social service, be that education, be it nursing, or whatever.
I'm glad you made that clarification there, because the draft, that should be included in addition to the draft. They should have that option. Thank you for that. I think very excellent comment. Go ahead.
I can have a comment, Reverend. I don't need the mic. I want to thank Jimmy Norris and let him know that I have a deep soft spot in my heart for his father. And if you want to know more about it, in this book on page 131, he mentions Nathaniel Giddings, and that was my brother. And you can read about it in the book.
And you spoke about Kermit Cockrell. I'd like for his niece to stand, please.
And Jimmy's my uncle too, so I hit the lottery. But I was born in Kilmarnock, and I attended Anna T. Jean School. I don't know how many remember that. School is closed, or it's not closed, but it's been renovated to some church. And Ophelia is where Kermit was from. Yeah, and my grandmother was from that area too. And it's great to be back and to see such an integrated community that would not have been possible 50 years ago.
Absolutely.
So it's great to see this community, and I'm honored to be here. I want to say one thing, though, too, about my uncle. He became a veterinarian because the quota system at the time did not allow African Americans. There was a limited amount of African Americans who could become doctors. He wanted to study medicine so bad that he chose veterinarian medicine as the alternative to not being involved in healing.
He was good.
And he was an excellent veterinarian. He took care of my cat. We lived in New York, and we brought her down to him to take care of him. He did a wonderful job. He was absolutely brilliant, man, and a brilliant speaker. I would give anything, if it were possible, that he could speak to this group. Go ahead.
Are there any other questions? Okay. I want to kind of piggyback off of what Nanette said. For those of you who may not know, the Interracial Conversations Group has been in existence for about 8 years. And it has been and we made a concerted effort to bring people together to educate, but also to discuss a very sensitive issue, which is race. And too often, people are reluctant to discuss it because they are somewhat embarrassed about their own heritage and are unwilling to deal with realities of race, period. But in order to understand it, you have to talk about it. We can't bury our heads in the sand. To better understand each other, we need more sessions like this, where people are unafraid to express themselves, but also unafraid to say, I don't know. And help me understand more about you and your culture. Because until we come to the reality that because we are human beings, we are more alike than we are unalike. And if we come with the right attitude, we can change the Northern Neck. We can inform and put our elected officials on notice that they have to change their thinking because they are not meeting the needs of the people in this community. And until we stand firm and hold them accountable for doing the right thing, then this community will never change. It will continue to be what it was in 1940, 1955, and 1970. Because the object right now, and I've gone to Board of Supervisors meetings, and they are insistent on keeping this community just as it was 50 plus years ago. But change happens because of people. When you get sick and tired of being sick and tired, it's time to stand up and do something. We invite you to come and be a part of our discussion. Please go to our website, Interracial Conversations Group, NNK. And there are a variety of videos and other information available so that you can find out who we are and what we are about. We are not afraid to engage in dialogue because we want our community to be the best it could possibly be. And everything that happens in this community, we are responsible for. The reason I say we are responsible for it is because we elect the ones that sit in the positions of power. And until we stand up and say we are not going to take this anymore, that you have to change how you're doing things and what you're doing. Otherwise, we will vote you out of office. And we stand together as a community because not only are we not benefiting, our children are not benefiting. And until we hold them accountable for improving our educational system, because see, there's still an achievement gap, whether we want to realize it or not. There are certain segments of our schools, particular groups, who are not receiving the education that they deserve. And all of us play a role in that, including their parents, but also the teachers and the administration. If change is to occur, it has to happen with us, but also those others who are outside of these walls, because you all have influence with several other people who are not here. And if you make the decision to be actively engaged, and then you are excited about what's going on, then you can influence others to come. And when more people come, the power structure shifts because the power structure will be within us. And that is when change happens. So we invite you to come on the 4th Tuesday of every month, right here at Mount Olive Baptist Church. Come, listen, share your experiences, share your voices, and get involved. Because the only way things change is to get involved. And when you get involved, others will as well, because you influence others. I want to also thank Jimmy again for coming and sharing his thoughts with us. And let's give him another.
thank you all for the opportunity. Good evening. Thank you.